So as we're getting started, I just wanted to thank Venerable for being here. He's got a very busy day, and he very kindly made time for us to share his wisdom and his expertise with all of us over this course. So we're just really grateful that that is able to happen. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And may I say, you have an incredible voice, don't you? It's the first time that I hear you speaking. It seems that kind of you're made to be a public speaker.
I've cultivated my meditation voice over several years.
All right. All right. So tell me when you're right to start.
Yes, I think we can go ahead.
All right. And so actually, before we start, I'm wondering if you have your own style of starting a session with prayers, refuge, and bodhicitta, or are you happy for me to do whatever I want?
Whatever you would prefer is great.
All right. Thank you very much. And so, first of all, welcome everyone. I see that we have quite a few people from the US, or maybe other parts of the world, but also a couple of people joining us from Australia. So thank you very much for being here. A few months ago, I teamed up for the first time with Thupten Nobeling. Gonna switch off all my pinging devices. And so a few months ago, I teamed up for the first time with Thupten Nobeling, and I had a lot of back and fro with Dundrup. And then a few weeks ago, Venerable Dundrup asked me if I could lead this Discovering Buddhism module on karma. And so we had a bit of discussion, and previously I've done Monday noontime sessions here, my time in Australia. And when I was talking to Dundrup, Dundrup suggested doing Monday, and I was like, yeah, no problem. Monday I'm free. I was a bit of a moron because I didn't realize that when Dundrup was speaking about Monday, it's Tuesday here. And so I realized it just about a week ago, and we have a busy study program here in Australia, and I looked at my schedule and I turned completely white. It's like my heart sank. Thought myself, oh my God, I made a big mess out of it. Luckily, you guys have transitioned into daylight saving or out of daylight saving, which made it possible for me to be here now. I finished a translation session just maybe 25 minutes ago or half an hour ago. And so it means that now we have 1.5 hours to spend together. And after that, I have half an hour break and I'm going again. So it's perfect timing altogether. So although, I was a bit of a moron, things worked out quite okay, perfectly. So it's nice to see you here. What I wanted to do is, first of all, maybe introduce myself, and then we're going to start a session with correcting motivation with refuge and bodhicitta, and then go slowly, gently, or maybe not slowly and gently, into the topic of this Discovering Buddhism module. And so, as you can see, I have a bit of an accent, of maybe a very strong accent. I grew up in Israel. I came across Buddhism 26 years ago when I was backpacking through India. I knew nothing about Buddhism, nothing about Hinduism. I was not necessarily interested. I was into backpacking in India and having a lot of fun. But I was at some point I met a girl, and she said that she was going to Dharamsala, and I was chasing that girl. So I said, well, let's go to Dharamsala as well. I went to Dharamsala, and I was hiking one day in the mountains on top of Dharamsala, just a day walk, not something too extraneous. And I met a couple of Buddhist monks that inspired some interest in me. They invited me into their small retreat place, and we were having an afternoon together, and they were telling me stories. And I was touched by their kindness. And so when I came back to my guest house, I bought a couple of books. One of them was Holiness the Dalai Lama's autobiography, and another general introduction to Buddhism. I think that it was called The Way to Freedom. And as I was reading through this material, I became interested. Many of the things that were in that book inspired some interest. I thought that there is value in them. Many of the things were completely beyond me, of course. But then when I went back home, I happened to come across an old childhood friend of mine that was organizing the first visit of Thupten Chodron. Maybe some of you know Thupten Chodron. She resides in the US. She has a center, Shavasti Abbey. And so she was organizing Thupten Chodron's first visit to Israel. So I had a time. I had an opportunity to go and do 10 days of introductory course to Buddhism. And this is how I started. So it's not that I was swept immediately head over heels by kind of spiritual revelation, but many things rang true. And it just continued on and on and on. I was a software engineer way back, but I was increasingly getting a little bit bored with being a software engineer. I've done it for 12 years. And so when I turned 30, I thought of quitting my job, taking a few months break, going back home, and after a few months break, going back home and getting a new job, a new contract. But I met another girl, as it happened. So I met another girl, and we ended up staying in India for 4 years. And I started, we were mainly at McLeodganj, but also traveling around India. And I started to study Tibetan. Then I joined the translators program of the FPMT. And then a few months before finishing the program in India, I got an offer to take up the position of the interpreter, the translator at Chenrezig Institute in Australia. And so at the time I was in India for almost 4 years. And for those of you who have been to India before, it can be quite intense. It's hard going. And so I was I thought I need a break from India. It can be quite, particularly when your defenses are eroding, kind of things in India can be quite intense, So I felt like I need a break. I got an offer here in Australia for 2 years as a translator for a new geshe at the center. So thought that Australia was never on the cards, but it's a nice break from India. And so I made a commitment for 2 years, and 17 years later, I'm still here. So I've been here at Chenrezig Institute for more than 17 years, translating for a few geshes here at the center, but also for visiting teachers, and also been doing some translations for touring teachers here in Australia and overseas. And bit by bit, I started also to take up teaching responsibilities or roles here at the center and also elsewhere. But my main gig still is interpreting. And so it's sort of a long introduction for saying that I apologize for my accent. It's an Israeli accent mixed up with a little bit of Australia and other places. If you have any, if you have problems understanding me, please, or if you have any questions, please put your hand up and we can have a discussion or questions, or can clarify whatever I say straight away. And also in the next few weeks, as we will cover different points related to karma, I think that it's a topic that inspires a lot of discussion. And so if at any given point, if you have questions or things to add to our discussion, please don't hold back, put your hand up and we can have a discussion. Now, often I like to start my sessions with a little bit of reflection in order to correct the motivation with refuge and bodhicitta, so that not only listening to our discussion or participating in this discussion will be participating in a Buddhist discussion, but also the whole thing will become a Buddhist practice. So if discussing the Dhamma is motivated by refuge, it turns our discussion to be not just in academic exercise, but it in itself is a Buddhist practice. And also, if we top it up with bodhicitta, then it will turn a discussion to be a Mahayana practice, so that directly and indirectly it will contribute to causes for our own enlightenment. And so let's take just a few seconds to calm our mind down. We can take 2 or 3 deep breaths to make sure that the mind becomes more settled, quiescent, more open and extensive. We will also then turn our attention to the body and quickly scan our body from our toes to the crown. And if you find any discomfort in your body or tension, then you can release it with an out breath. So let's take just a minute to settle down. And in order to develop mental stability and mental focus, and to help our inner chatter to subside, we will turn our attention to the breathing process and count a round of 21 breaths. So as we count 21 breaths, you can focus on either the rising and falling of your chest or your abdomen, or the flow of air in and out of your nostrils. And so breathing out and breathing in is 1 breath, and we will do it for 21 times. So to begin our session for today in correcting our motivation, we can remind ourselves that we have attained a precious human body, precious human life. We have all the external and internal conditions that make it possible for us to develop our mind to an utmost extent to make it perfect. And if we think of the people that surround us in close proximity and wider circles, we can appreciate even to a greater extent the incredible opportunity that we have, for we have met the Dhamma. We have nothing that blocks us or prevents us from making sense of the Dhamma. We have the leisure to study the Dhamma. We can make this lifetime meaningful through changing our priorities emphasizing more positive behavior and trying to rid ourselves gradually from things which are unwholesome, either with respect to ourselves or with respect to others. And the time that we have at hand for doing that in this life is limited. As we're getting closer and closer to the moment of death, though we have no idea when will death be met, one thing that we can be clear of is that at the time of death, upon the separation between the body and mind, the body will be left behind, our possessions will be left behind, our friends and relatives will be left behind. And the thing that will continue to future life is our mind and a sense of self. And all the positive or negative habits that we have created in this life and previous lifetimes as well. The karma that we have accumulated in this and previous lives. And so in order to facilitate a better transition from this lifetime to the next, and also to ensure that again, we are born in a good state of rebirth, being able to utilize our mind to protect ourselves, to protect others from future suffering. We need to understand better the way that our mind works, and certainly to understand better karma. And so in correcting a motivation for today, we can think that I'm going to do my best to study this topic, karma, which is vast and extensive. And there are many points in this topic that will remain unclear or vague. But as much as we're going to keep an open mind. Again, first of all, some knowledge, some understanding. We're going to continue to think about it and meditate on that. In keeping in mind that our end goal is to become Buddha, to embody the Dhamma, and to become a Sangha. That would be a final refuge, our own Buddhahood, the Dhamma that we will develop in our mind, and the Sangha that we will become. In order to do so, we rely upon the Buddha, the teacher, the historical Buddha. Rely upon the Dhamma that the Buddha taught, through the Dhamma that the Buddha developed in his own mind. We also rely upon the Sangha, the community of Arya Bodhisattvas, and also our spiritual teachers. So I think that in Thupten Norbuling, you've been relying upon Geshe Sherab and other great teachers. And so we also see them as the Sangha that we rely upon, that help us to understand the teachings of the Buddha. So with a deep sense of reliance upon the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we think, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. That the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. To the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. So the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. To the Buddha, the Dhamma, and Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. So the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. All right. I'm wondering, Michael, if you could make me a co-host so that I can share some things on screen.
I already have, and in fact, I actually think I accidentally made you host.
All right. So I have the power now. Thank you very much.
You now have the power, yes.
All right. I will wield my power.
Venerable lost. He was host, and so I made you host. And so when that happened, he lost it. He has to be made co-host again.
Okay. Oh yeah, I can see that Yeah, so please, Lord, make me a co-host, my Lord. Let's see.
Hasn't happened yet.
No.
Michael, you're host again, so.
And I will make him co-host.
Thank you.
There we go. All set. Now you can share.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And so I was thinking of how to present the topic, Discovering Buddhism, all about karma. And to begin with, I thought that since you guys have been studying together Discovering Buddhism, which covers many of the topics of the steps of the path to enlightenment, I thought of, first of all, making a connection between the topic of karma and the tradition of the Lamrim, the steps of the path to enlightenment. And so for those of you who are more familiar with the structure of the Lamrim, and before we get to that, the first Lamrim text was composed by Atisha, an Indian master. So Atisha made his way Atisha was an Indian scholar. He was one of the foremost scholars of the Nalanda monastery. It's actually interesting to think about it in terms of the time in which Nalanda monastery in India, the great institution, was still alive and active, and the time in which Buddhism started to develop in Tibet. And so, roughly speaking, I think that historical accounts speak of Buddhism traveling from India to Tibet around the 7th century. There's already been some influence of Buddhism in Tibet, Tibet being kind of closer to the Silk Road. So there was some Buddhist influence in Tibet coming from the Silk Road, from China and so forth, but also there's been some influence of Tibet coming from India. So Buddhism started to travel to Tibet from India around, let's say, the 7th century, which I think that was also around the time that Shantideva was alive. So in this tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we emphasize the teachings of Shantideva. It's pretty cool to think that he was alive and active at a time in which Buddhism was making its way to Tibet. So around 300 years later, I think, around the 10th or 11th century, an Indian master called Atisha was invited to Tibet, to Western Tibet. So there was the first dissemination of Buddhism in Tibet, the first wave. Then Buddhism went into decline. There were 100 or 200 years in which the old tradition was still prevalent, still big. And then there was a second wave of dissemination of Buddhism in Tibet. And it started in, let's say, Western Tibet, Western towards the center of Tibet, and then took over Tibet completely. So Atisha made his way from India to Tibet, and on the way he composed the first Lamrim text that explains the steps of the path to enlightenment. The text is called the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, in which he took teachings that were given in the second turning of the wheels, teachings on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. He combined them with an explanation of Maitreya from the Ornament for Clear Realization, and presented not only the steps of the path to enlightenment that were taught in a hidden manner, but also the steps of the path to enlightenment that was taught explicitly within the teachings of the Buddha. So it was a new tradition. We know, and then after Atisha, we had a collection of Kadampa masters and other masters that have explained the teachings of Atisha. For us, as being part of the FPMT, which is part of the Gelugpa tradition, we emphasize the teachings of the great Tsongkhapa. And so Tsongkhapa was the founder of the Gelugpa tradition, and he composed the great exposition of the steps of the path of enlightenment, the Lamrim Chenmo, the middling presentation of the steps of the path of enlightenment, the abridged presentation of the steps of the path of enlightenment called Songs of Spiritual Experience. But also he composed other presentations of the Lamrim, the foundation of all good qualities, the three principal aspects of the path. All of them are based on Atisha's lamp for the path of enlightenment. And so, first of all, when we look at this presentation, Atisha and Lama Tsongkhapa says, I think that their approach is they're teaching the Lamrim to a community of Buddhists. We, or at least me, myself, when I encountered Buddhism, I did not encounter Buddhism as being Buddhist. The assumption that is made in the presentation of the Lamrim is that it's given for a Buddhist audience, not necessarily an educated Buddhist audience, and therefore it teaches a Buddhist audience what they need to do in their spiritual practice. But for us, as we read through the Lamrim, we have to deal with a few complications. Like, for example, to begin with, the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher. That's the beginning of the Lamrim text. Often it is called, I think in the FMT world, it is called Guru devotion. But Guru devotion is part of the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher, right? There are more things that we need to do, additional things that we need to do in order to rely upon a spiritual teacher. We need to be able to assess the qualities, to understand what the qualities are, what the value is of these qualities. And through that, we develop faith and trust in a spiritual teacher, and then learn how to rely upon that person, how to devote ourselves to relying upon a spiritual teacher. And so that's the first topic. Then once we rely upon a spiritual teacher, we also, or through relying upon a spiritual teacher, we also look at our priorities. We look at our priorities through understanding that we have attained a precious human rebirth with freedoms and richnesses, freedoms and opportunities. So we understand that as human beings, we're in a unique position to make the most out of this life, a position or an opportunity that is not afforded by a different rebirth. And the whole purpose in looking at this incredible opportunity that we have now is to change our priorities. Currently, we're mostly engrossed in worldly affairs, mundane affairs. And so we revisit our priorities through understanding that we have this great potential, which is so difficult to get, and it is easily lost. But also, to top it up, we start to, when we think of having to make the most out of this incredible opportunity that we have in this life, we start following the steps of the path of those of the small scope, in reflecting upon our own death and impermanence, our own impermanence. And so we recognize that for us, hands down, death is certain. There's no avoiding death, which reminds me, by the way, just a kind of side story. 20 or 30 years ago, I had a co-worker in Israel when I was doing IT, and he belonged to a group that believed in immortality. And so when I was inquiring what's the goal with immortality, he said that if you believe strongly that you will never die, you will never die. That was the belief. And I asked, how does it work? And he said, well, if you want to buy, like, for example, shiny dancing shoes, like step shoes, if you think about it day and night with wholehearted intention, one day you will come to possess dancing shoes. That's the way that it was explained to me. And so I think that now for us, we understand that it's not going to work with death and impermanence. Even if we're going to think, I'm not going to die, we are going to die. So death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. The clock is ticking, of course. You know, our lifespan constantly diminishes and cannot be extended. And the time of death is uncertain. At the time of death, we will leave the body behind and continue on to our next life. And so then we start to then again evaluate our priorities. If this lifetime is so short and future lifetime is like an ocean of time, then should I spend some time trying to think of what will happen to me in my future lifetime, and less time being completely bogged in affairs that belong to this lifetime only. So it's a powerful reorganizer of the conscious, of our priorities. And so we think of death and impermanence, and then it brings us, from the point of view of the Lamrim, it brings us to thinking of what will occur to us in our next lifetime. So am I going to be born in a pleasant state of existence or unpleasant state of existence? We sometimes call it higher rebirth, lower rebirth, happy rebirth, miserable rebirth. What's going to happen to us in our next lifetime? Is it going to be grim? Sorry, there's a massive fly around here. So is it going to be grim, or is it going to be comfortable? So there's a lot of explanation, very graphic explanation of the different states of existence pertaining to hellish states of existence, the hot hells, the cold hells, occasional hells, and so forth, and then neighboring hells, and then suffering of pretas, which are called in English hungry ghosts, the suffering of animals. So we're getting a little bit scared of miserable states of existence. We develop the wish to be born in comfortable or more pleasant state of existence, and then the next step for making sure that we are protected from suffering of miserable states of existence is going for refuge. And so if we feel miserable states of existence, then we turn our mind to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and trusting that they have the ability to protect us from suffering. So we go for refuge. And then having gone for refuge, we get instructions of what we need to do. So basically there are two areas that we need to take care of. One of them is pertaining to what we should do. That's one side. The other side are the things that, hands down, we shouldn't do. But the summation of all of it, it becomes quite detailed, but the summation of it is karma. So having gone for refuge, what we do is we gather karma. We act in a way that accords with karma. And so I'll go back to that brief presentation that I presented and look at those key points. So relying upon a spiritual teacher, that's the beginning of the Lamrim. Then appreciating our precious human rebirth and becoming determined to make it meaningful through following the steps of the path of the three scopes. As we follow the steps of the path of the three scopes, first off, we follow the steps of the path which are shared with those of the small scope. So we reshape our priorities through becoming mindful of our own mortality. Then we freak out about what might happen to us in next lifetime. We become fearful of miserable states of existence. Then we go for refuge to the three jewels. And having gone for refuge, we need to properly guard karma, actions, and the results. So this is where you find the topic of karma in the Lamrim. Then the topic of karma is taught in the section pertaining to the steps of the path of those of the small scope. But as we build our understanding of our Buddhist practice, our Buddhist beliefs, our Buddhist practice, the topic of karma is becoming bigger and bigger. It not only encompasses the things that we speak about in relation to the steps of the path of those of the small scope, but also those of the middling scope, and those of the great scope, in that whatever we do is done in accordance with karma, which means that we need to start building our understanding of what karma is. Now, karma is, at least in this particular point in time, is such a, I guess, commonly accepted buzzword. Everyone is talking about karma, not only from a Buddhist perspective, but also in popular culture. Even in politics, sometimes you hear about politicians using the word karma. And so I think that when we speak about karma in general, either in popular culture, politics, or other areas of our life, or when we speak about it more in a more particular way in Buddhism, it has a sort of a mystical vibe to it. There's a lot of sometimes there's more unknown than known. There's more hidden than what is revealed. And so we don't want to leave karma to be this mysterious factor, like everything happens to us because of karma. This is their karma to experience that. This is my karma to experience that. We don't want to leave it just to that general discussion, but we want to understand better the mechanism to, the best as we can, to our best ability, so that we'll be able also to influence the course of our actions, what will happen to us in the future. And so in order to untangle karma, we have to take a few factors into consideration. So then when we think of how we approach the topic of karma, then here there are many words on this slide that I prepared. Let's try to make sense of some of it. And so the first section says there are different types of phenomena in general. Manifest phenomena, that's the first category of phenomena. So manifest phenomena pertains to what we see with our senses, things which are evident, they are obvious to our, not only to our sense consciousnesses, but also to our mental consciousness. We don't need to rely upon reasons, to rely upon logic in order to realize them initially. We can realize them through the power of the fact. And so, for example, things which are manifest to us are heat and cold, pain and pleasure, the taste of chocolate, the smell of flowers, the sound of rustling of wind, in the trees or in the leaves and so forth. All those things are manifest to us. We don't need reasons and logic in order to initially realize them. We can realize them through the power of experience. Karma is not manifest to us. We cannot realize karma through the force of experience, although we are experiencing the result of karma. But it's not something that we can think, I now understand karma because I experience a really delicious cup of coffee. And so karma is not a manifest phenomenon. Then let's look at two other levels of phenomena. We have the slightly hidden and the extremely hidden. And so we have different things in the category of slightly hidden phenomena. Hidden phenomena in general are phenomena which are not initially realized through the force of experience, but phenomena which we need to rely upon a way of thinking through analysis and investigation, or at least reasons in order to initially make sense of them, to initially realize them. And so, for example, when we think of impermanence, when we think of death and impermanence is not readily available to us. It's not difficult to understand, but we still rely upon certain procedures that help us to understand our own mortality. And so the procedures that we use were really nicely defined by Atisha and also Tsongkhapa and also other masters. So when we go through the 9-point death meditation, we think of, well, death is certain because in this world, the Lord of Death will certainly cannot be avoided. My lifespan constantly diminishes and cannot be extended. When I'm alive, there's so little time to practice the Dhamma, and therefore death is certain. Then the time of death is uncertain because in this continent or in this world, the time of death is uncertain. There are so many conditions contributing to death. So few conditions are supportive of life, and our body is so fragile, so even small conditions can cause our death quite quickly. So we understand that death is certain. So anyway, using such procedures, we can understand our own mortality. So it's slightly hidden. It's not difficult, it's just slightly hidden. Now, let's look at another topic which I think all of us find really difficult, or at least most of us find really difficult: emptiness. For those of you who have heard of emptiness or selflessness before, normally I think when we hear about this topic for the first few times, and we get a lot of technical explanation, including scriptural citations from those Indian masters that have strange names like Nagarjuna and Chandakirti and so forth, it's overwhelming. And although after some time we can say the words, still it's quite hard going. It's quite difficult to understand the topic, but it's still slightly hidden. It's not extremely hidden. It's still a level of things which are slightly hidden. There are things which are extremely hidden to us, which are things that we can understand using scriptural citations, which we verify through a certain process of analysis that they cannot be contradicted. And so, particularly, what is extremely hidden to us is karma. In that, in the Buddhist tradition, we said that, for example, in this life, when I become, for example, terminally ill or experience great obstacles, this is a result of actions that I've done before. So knowing, for example, that 10 rebirths ago, or maybe 1,000 years ago, I've said something nasty to Venerable Dundrup in his previous life. And as a result of that, in this lifetime, I experienced this great difficulty is extremely hidden. It is extremely hidden to the point in which a Buddha would know how to make these connections between actions that were done many lifetimes ago and the manifestation of the results in this life. But for us, it will remain at the level of extremely hidden. We will rely upon explanation, upon teachings, upon scriptural citations, and so forth. And at some point, we will take those teachings on a, you can say, face value, in order then to think that, well, this is how it is with karma, and therefore I have to act to behave in a way that accords with karma. And so, looking back, looking again at these different types of phenomena, manifest phenomena, slightly hidden phenomena, extremely hidden phenomena, karma belongs to, or it falls under these last two categories, slightly hidden phenomena and extremely hidden phenomena. And so let's look at this second part of this chart. Karma is found mostly between slightly hidden and the very hidden. And so to develop trust in the working of karma, what we need to do is, first of all, we need to study extensively the teachings of the Buddha. And so the Buddha, we often say that the Buddha was alive and active in India 2,600 years ago. The Buddha attained a state of enlightenment when he was around, I think, roughly speaking, 35 years old, and he passed away when he was 81 years old. So let's say that, roughly speaking, he spent 45 years teaching the Dharma. Now, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we said that the Buddha taught 84,000 discourses. I'm always wondering if someone sat down one day and enumerated those 84,000 discourses, or it's just like a number that we pull out of a hat. I don't know, but here behind me, if you see this box here, this is a collection of scripture that is called in Tibetan the Kangyur, the collection of words of the Buddha, the words of the Buddha. It has, can't remember how many volumes. Anyway, 100 or 200 volumes, maybe 200. Can't remember the exact number. I wonder if we unwrap them and try to come down with a list of 84,000 discourses, whether it will come up with a round number. I will leave it to you to check. I don't know. It's too difficult. But the Buddha taught 84,000 discourses. Then they were taught, as the Buddha was teaching for 45 years, then he taught them in three phases, which are called in Tibetan the three turnings of the wheel. And so first of all, the Buddha gave teachings on the perfection of wisdom. On the four truths, right? So teachings on the four truths. And it's not that the Buddha just gave one talk, public talk, an evening talk on the four truths. There were quite a few sutras. There are quite a few sutras that the Buddha taught for over a few years that belong to the first turning of the wheel of the four truths. In the first turning of the wheel, the Buddha said, not only taught the four truths, but in general, one which examined the philosophical view that the Buddha expressed, he said that whatever exists by way of its own characteristics, which is another way to make it simple. The Buddha said that whatever exists has some level of independent existence. That's what the Buddha said in the first turning of the wheel. And he said that because there were students that were right for this set of teachings at a time. But later on, when conditions were better and there were more disciples that had other dispositions, the Buddha said, actually, in an actual fact, nothing exists independently. nothing exists by way of its own characteristics. And he taught that in a set of sutras, which are called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which were taught in the second turning of the wheel. And then, since in the first turning of the wheel, the Buddha said, everything exists by way of its own characteristics. And in the second turning of the wheel, the Buddha said, nothing exists by way of its own characteristics. Some students approached him and said, what's the goal? You're contradicting yourself. And so, of course, I'm simplifying that. I reckon that he didn't tell the Buddha what's to go with that. They said that, please, Buddha, Venerable Buddha, or Bhagavan, and so on and so forth. And the Buddha, in replies, taught the third turning of the wheel, particularly a sutra that is called the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, where he explained the distinctions between what exists by way of its own characteristics and what does not exist by way of its own characteristics, but also teachings on Buddha nature are also mainly found within the third turning of the wheel. Anyway, to cut a long story short and connecting in with the topic of karma, in order to understand karma, we need to first of all study the teachings of the Buddha. So as much as we can. And our opportunities for us, people that come from a similar background, although, I grew up in Israel and you grew up in different circumstances, all of us grew up in different circumstances, still we can say that there's a lot of commonality to all of us in that we've encountered Buddhism likely in a later stage of our life. The media of instruction is likely to be English or other languages, not in Tibetan, or definitely not in Indian language. Some of us have received Buddhist teachings maybe in Vietnamese or other languages, but all in all, for most of us, many of us, we've encountered Buddhism in a later stage of our life. And also we have certain obligations in this life. We have families, we have work to do, we need to pay the bills, we need to have a mortgage, we need to do this and that. So we do our best to study whatever the Buddha said. And so it's good to think about it as this is my job or task for the rest of my life, to continue to build up my knowledge of the Buddha Dharma. And so we study as much as we can extensively. That's the first thing that we do in order to understand karma. But then also we analyze whatever we study in relation to things which are manifest, things which are slightly hidden, and things which are extremely hidden. So we analyze the manifest and the slightly hidden. And we also verify the validity of the teachings and match it up with our personal experience. In that we do a lot of, first of all, we learn, we gain the knowledge. But then also we need to think about it a lot and to meditate on it for a long time and start to match it up with our personal experience to see whether the teachings of the Buddha are reflected in our life. The Buddha taught, for example, true suffering. He spoke about not only suffering, which is a sensation of pain, physical or mental, but he also spoke about how most of the things that we seek in our life, which we think are going to cause us happiness and pleasure and comfort and so forth, are pleasurable, but also they have an inbuilt problem within them. They're called suffering of change. And that whatever we seek, or most of the things that we seek are called suffering of change, in that we think that it's going to make us happy, and happiness or comfort is going to last for a very long time. But after some time, it's no longer satisfactory. Not only it's no longer satisfactory, it's causing us pain at some point. And of course, there are obvious ways that we can understand that. Like, for example, who in the past has done some binge eating? I've done it. It's like when I remember family holidays where we have, important family dinners. And, my mom used to make delicious food. It's so hard to stop. So you have a plate full of food. It's so delicious. And then you add some more and you add some more and you add some more. It's all delicious, but after some time, it's just uncomfortable. And going to sleep with a belly that is just too full is so uncomfortable. So you sweat overnight and you turn from one side to the next. And the following morning, you wake up being completely kind of wasted and overwhelmed and lethargic and heavy. And also those pleasant experiences turn into something that is not only no longer satisfactory, but also it turns into a sense of discomfort. I mean, this is something that is quite simple, but we can definitely think of things that we think that are causes can give us happiness, but it turn to be strong pain. So that's the second level of suffering. And we can also, not only we study that, we also match it up with our own personal experience. And then we also understand the third type of suffering, which is pervasive suffering of conditionality, the third type of suffering. So we understand, we study the teachings of the Buddha. It describes this body as being not good enough, not satisfactory enough. It came to us through the process that was controlled by karma and afflictions. And the moment we have a body such as this, it is guaranteed that we will age, that we will get sick, that we will die, that we will be looking for something without being able to find it, that will encounter again and again things that cause us displeasure, and that will have to be separated repeatedly from things that cause us pleasure, and all other shenanigans, which are just kind of not good enough. And not only it conditions us in this life to those experiences, but also because of that, we act in a certain way. We react to situations, we compound our suffering in this life and in future life. And so I'm giving all that spiel because we study the teachings of the Buddha and we match it up with our personal experience. And then we also start to receive teachings on things which are more complicated, like, for example, selflessness. Oh, before selflessness is the way that our mind works. We all, I think, received teachings on our mind, how we react to anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, but also positive states of mind, how we feel when we meditate on love and compassion and patience and generosity, how the mind expands and opens and so forth. And so through teachings that we get, which are sourced in the Buddha, but also from our spiritual teachings, when we see our spiritual teachers and they inspire us, I think that, I've met Geshe Sherab a few times in his visits to Australia. He stayed with us at Chin Rezik Institute a few times. Then he's quite a cool person. He seems to be a very even person. And so not only we receive teachings from people like that, but also we have someone that we can relate to, that we can assess how the teachings have influenced their mind. And all along, over time, there's a sense of trust that is developed in our mind that not only the teachings make sense, teachings of the Buddha make sense, but also that if we put them into practice, our mind will be made better and our life will be made better. And so I connect all of that then with looking at the teachings on karma. And so then the third point that I put here is if the manifest and the slightly hidden makes sense to us, then trust in the extremely hidden can be developed gradually. And so when we speak about karma, particularly in the next few weeks, we will start to look in a more specific way at certain actions. Like, we have the presentation of the 10 non-virtues. So killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, then the 4 non-virtues of speech, lying, divisive speech, and so forth. Each one of them is described also from the point of view of the results that those actions bring forth. And so how do we trust this presentation? How do I know, for example, that from killing that is done in a particular way, with strong anger or strong hatred, with a deliberate intention to harm someone, I can be born in a miserable state of existence? How do I know that? How do I believe in that? It's hard, isn't it? So we think of teachings that we got before, from teachings of the Buddha, from our teachers, how other teachings made sense, and we open our mind for the possibility that things that we cannot verify now in a very precise way, we open our mind to the possibility of these teachings also making sense or being correct. Certainly, there are levels of karma which can be verified. So, for example, we perform an illegal action. I'd say that probably of the worst thing that we can do is kill another human being. If we kill another human being, we are penalized. We have a legal system. We're going to be prosecuted. It is likely that we're going to end up doing some jail term, or, depending on where we are, where we live, there might be death penalty, capital punishment, or not capital punishment. Anyway, we can see that the results of some actions can be visibly seen in this life. We don't need to have, we don't need a mysterious presentation of karma to understand that when we steal, we are branded as thieves. Now, if others know about our committing a felony or theft or what have you, then we are branded as a thief. Others don't trust us, that we don't have a lot of credibility, that we are penalized by the system of rules and laws that we have wherever we live. And so this level of karma can certainly be verified based on our own experience. But also some levels of karma that cannot be verified precisely, or cannot be verified to the point where it's hard to immediately generate a realization of all the ins and outs, all the coarse levels and subtle levels of karma. And so we need extensive learning, look at other areas of the Buddhas, of the teachings that we get from our teachers. And I think that it helps to kind of keep an open mind. If this set of teachings is correct, it is likely that even if I don't see that at the present, all the ins and outs of karma, it is likely that also this presentation is correct. But I think that we cannot force the belief in karma. We cannot manufacture it in a contrived way. We have to give ourselves the space and the time to explore the teachings of the Buddha, to explore how they affect our own mentality. And then I think that if we give ourselves the space, after a long time, or maybe short time, for me, I think that it's still a work in progress, as years go by, our trust in the working of karma, and also our ability to behave in an ethical way grows and increases, giving ourselves the space to do it. And also being honest about it. We kind of sometimes, I think that it happens sometimes amongst our, when you hang out with Buddhists, that you start speaking like them, and you say stuff that maybe don't make a lot of sense to you, but everyone say that, so you also say that. No, what can I do? This is my own karma. There's nothing that I can do about it, because this is karma, or such and such happened to me because that's my karma. No, we say those things because we hang up with Buddhists, but do we actually believe in that? Does it hold a lot of sway in the way that we behave? I mean, for it to hold a lot of sway, we need to give ourselves a lot of time and space to explore that. And so I'm wondering if you guys have any questions so far. Right. Namaste. We have some visitors here to the Gompa. How are you? You feel free to come up and explore the altar. Have a look at the altar. Okay. And so let's look at the next section. What is karma? As we are talking about karma. And so in Tibetan language, the word for karma is le. And the meaning of the word le is action. So karma is an action. So rather than keeping karma as a mysterious topic, the meaning of karma is an action. And so there's a process by which we perform actions. Just a second. Are you guys from Nepal?
Yes.
All right. Where from in Nepal?
Japa.
Okay, cool. And so karma, we said that karma is an action. So we perform actions, physical, verbal, and mental actions, their activities. Then the next moment, we have an imprint that is placed upon our mind or our continuum in general. Now, an imprint is a potential that has the ability to give rise to a result in the future. And so when we speak about accumulating karma, what we're accumulating are potentials. We perform actions, physical, verbal, mental actions. We place those potentials upon a continuum so that when conditions are met in the future, these potentials ripen in terms of different experiences or, let's say different experiences. That's the process of karma. And so then when we think of some key points, key considerations that we need to have when we start to think of karma, how so many things, so many different areas within Buddhism are connected with karma. I made those 4 points here, which I think that are important to think of in relation to karma. So first of all, recognizing our own mind, how the mind works. This is crucial also for the understanding of karma. So we perform actions. Our actions are motivated by certain states of mind often. I mean, of course, there are actions that we do unintentionally, without even knowing. You walk somewhere and you crush ants or other insects, or you drive along a road and you happen to be squashing butterflies or what have you. No, most of the time you're not even aware of that. But still, when we understand karma, we want mainly to look at the actions which are motivated by certain states of mind. So we need to understand our mind, first of all, to understand these motivational forces in our mind. And so we have a really good presentation of minds and mental factors, which is part of the DB program that you guys have been studying. I think that I assume that some of you have studied this module on what mind is. So that's one area that we need to look at in order to understand karma. The second one is the consideration of past and future lives, which I think that for all of us is, or for most of us, maybe not all of us, for most of us is a difficult topic. And so it is relevant to the topic of karma because, of course, when we discuss karma, when we think of karma, we are interested in the experiences that we have in this life. We want to make sense of what happens to us in this life, positive and negative, but also the whole orientation is that we need to properly guide karma in this life so that we're not going to end up experiencing suffering and pain in future lives. And so we definitely have to then do some thinking of past and future lifetime. Again, when we think of our background, or at least now I can only speak about myself, and I'm very good at speaking about myself. And so it can be boring speaking about oneself, but anyway, I grew up in a secular setup. Now, of course, being born in Israel, I grew up in Israel, so it's a Jewish culture or Jewish vibe. But my family was pretty secular. We never went to synagogue. We kind of did not do religious stuff. I guess it's like here, most people in Australia, or many of my friends in Australia celebrate Christmas, or celebrate Easter, but it's more of a family gathering rather than religious beliefs. And so karma, so to speak of karma, or to think of karma, to think of past and future lifetime was not part of my upbringing. And so I encountered the topic of past and future lifetimes when I encountered Buddhism. And for me, it's still work in progress to develop utmost belief, wholehearted belief in the existence of past and future lifetime. I think that probably I started with zero belief in the existence of past and future lifetimes. And probably now, if I put it on the scale, I hope that I'm on the kind of 95% on to fully accepting the existence of past and future lifetimes, but maybe there will always be some kind of doubt. Maybe if you're not born into a culture, into a tradition that wholeheartedly from day one believes in past and future lifetime, there will maybe always be some kind of doubt. So for me, it's still work in progress. I think of my Tibetan friends, or I have many friends from China or Taiwan. For many of them, it's like past and future lifetime is like a fact. The sun rises in the east, it sets in the west. and past and future lifetime exist exactly on the same level. It's fact. For me, it's not like that. And so we study Buddhism, or we start to study the reasons and logic that offers some support for the existence of past and future lifetimes. We look at reasons such as, for example, that there is a continuity to our consciousness. So we have a consciousness which is not our body. It's not physical. Our consciousness is supported on the body. Our consciousness is related to the brain, to the working of the brain, but it's not a product of the brain. It's not a function of the brain, but currently it functions independent upon the brain. So I'm going back to the previous point, recognizing our mind, recognizing that there is a consciousness which is not a physical organ in our body, but it is supported on the organs in our body. And so we need to do a lot of study to think about it, also think about it in terms of our experience in order to understand that and to develop some belief in that. And so that's one reason. Then we think of the continuity of consciousness in terms of it is a functioning thing. So one moment produces the next moment of consciousness, and the current moment of consciousness was generated by a previous moment of consciousness. So we can trace back a continuity of consciousness to the point of birth in this life, and then raise the question, where did consciousness come from? It being something that is produced through cause and conditions, and then concluding that it must have come from a consciousness that was there before the moment of conception. And then also to add to that, people that have different habits that cannot be explained just in terms of the way that they were conditioned to things in this life. People that have memories from previous lifetimes. Now, how can we verify that memories that they might have had in previous lifetimes are indeed valid memories? How can we do that? I mean, we can hear stories, but it does not mean to say that everyone that tells us a story from previous lifetime is necessarily giving us an accurate account. So what I'm saying at the kind of the bottom line is that there are many things for us to think of, many things to consider, many things to think of. Now, sometimes I think that when I think of my teacher, my main teacher, and he has some cool stories from his previous lifetime, so pertaining to previous life, which is not telling the stories wide in the open, but some things I've had before. It's easy to kind of think that, yeah, definitely for him, past and future lifetime makes sense. For me, less so. So we think about it. Now, what I'm saying is that we think about it, we examine that, and over time, hopefully, maybe, and hopefully, better understanding, better trust in the existence of past and future lifetimes evolves. This is another crucial part of starting to develop trust in the working of karma. Now, I'm wondering if Kodo Latifa is, I hope that I'm saying the name right. Did you have a question? All right. Can you unmute yourself, or? I'm wondering if people can unmute themselves. Yes. Cool. All right. So first of all, what is your name, please?
Kodo.
Kodo. Okay, cool. Hi, Kodo.
Hi. Sondru. Blah.
Yeah. All right, please, if you have any questions.
No, I don't have a question.
Oh, okay. I thought that you were raising your hand. Sorry.
Oh, I've had experiences of seeing my past lives and my close people's past lives.
That's cool.
And I've felt the winds as well, coming in the body on conception of my daughter and leaving dead people's bodies.
That's wonderful.
So no question for me.
That's great. Now, sometimes I wish that I was now kind of less materialistic and more spiritual, to have kind of a more, kind of intuitive trust in the working of, in past and future lifetimes. I do trust them that they exist, but for me, it's like still, in some sense, work in progress. Although, it's weird to say that as a monk. It's weird for a monk to admit that they have still some form of doubt, but no, we have to be honest where we are, where we are at. Honest with ourselves and sometimes honest with others. I think that it's okay. No problems with that. And so, considering past and future lifetimes also crucial for thinking of karma. Then considering causality. So in general, impermanence, the topic of impermanence is one of the foundation topics in Buddhism. So causes and conditions come together, they produce effects. So normally in relation to karma, we say that how do we understand karma? Well, we think of the external world. We see how when cause and conditions come together, they produce results. I guess that the most banal, you could say, example is how a seed comes together with conditions that cause its germination. So we have a seed, which is just a potential coming together with water and food and warmth and sunlight, good soil. And so the seed germinates and produces a plant. So we can understand external causality in this way. And then we can also understand causality in a way that is more subtle, like, for example, causality in relation to our mind or to our body. We can start to think of the aging process of our body or cause and conditions affecting the body. And then we can also think about cause and conditions affecting our mind and the result that we get from that. So that's going into a more subtle level. And then we turn our mind towards cause and conditions, which are called internal causation, which is karma. And so often it's said, look at how compounded phenomena which are compounded by cause and conditions work. Cause and conditions externally come together, they produce effects. Turn your mind inwardly and understand how also internal causality work. Our actions leave potentials, imprints upon a mind stream. When cause and conditions are made, those imprints, those potentials maturate, they mature, they ripen into a particular experience. And so, though this is how it is explained, and I think that it makes sense in a course level, still to have full trust that, to go from saying that when a seed is met with water, food, and so forth, it produces a flower. And therefore, when I kill an insect or a bug, I experience suffering in future lifetime. There's still kind of a long distance to go before this makes sense. But it's still helpful to think of how cause and conditions come together, they produce effects. Similarly, actions that we do, which are functioning things, since they are functioning things, they do produce their own respective results. So that's another thing that we need to consider. The last thing that we need to consider for karma to start make sense is to, as I said before, to consider the validity of the teacher and the teachings. And so to begin with, the validity of the Buddha. So for us as Buddhists, we regard the Buddha as being a valid being, an authentic teacher. But to see the Buddha as an authentic, a valid teacher, we need to do some study, analysis, investigation, and to come to our own conclusion. Now, in the FMT organization, we rely upon Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche, who has this amazing devotion to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And we often are completely swept away by the devotion of Lama Tsongkhapa. And we kind of, when we are in the aura, let's say, of Lama Zopa, not Lama Tsongkhapa, Lama Zopa, when we are in the presence of Lama Zopa, there's kind of this, it zhuzhes us up with this incredible energy. I'm wondering, zhuzhing up, is it an Australian word, or do you also say that in the US? You also say that in the US, okay. So we get that kind of great inspiration from Lama Tsongkhapa, from Lama Zopa, but still, we need to do a lot of study and reflection, often, maybe not for all of us, but in general, to come to the conclusion that the teachings of the Buddha make sense. I can analyze them, I can investigate them, I can scrutinize them, I can reach a conclusion, I have logical procedures and very clearly defined boundaries of what makes a correct argument, what constitutes a correct argument, and what argument is not a correct argument. And so I can use a logical process to verify that the teachings of the Buddha are authentic, and also to then reach a conclusion with respect to the Buddha being a valid being. Or also the other way around, I can also think of some arguments proving that the Buddha is a valid being, and therefore concluding that if a Buddha is a valid being, an authentic teacher, also the teachings of the Buddha are truthful. But we need to do our own checking. And so not only the Buddha as a teacher, but what about the teachers that we rely upon, the teachers in the FBMT or other teachers that we rely upon? We have to do our own checking that there are valid teachers, particularly in this point in time where the world is full of spiritual teachers. Some of them are authentic, but some of them are charlatans, or some of them, they don't have to be deliberately charlatans, but how would we know that the person that we rely upon is someone that can teach us a truth if we don't do our own checking? And so we check. We make sure that the person that teaches us is a valid teacher because they have credentials. I mean, this is something that is easy to verify. We know that, for example, if someone is a geshe, is called a geshe, particularly in the FPMT organization, that they have gone through a process in which they have studied the text, they've set for a system of exams. They had to conduct themselves in a particular way because otherwise there are problems in the monastery. And also there's a lot of, I think, peer pressure in the system. If you're in the system in a Tibetan monastery and you misbehave, then you're going to get a bad reputation and others are going to warn you from that person. And so we kind of do our own checking. We rely upon teachers, and also we investigate the teachings. And we're encouraged to investigate the teachings. Like we said that the Buddha said, don't accept my teachings just because you believe in me because I'm Buddha, but verify the teachings after you have investigated them, like you investigate a nugget of gold. You cut it into two, you melt it in fire, you scratch it, rub it to make sure that it's an authentic piece of gold. Similarly, investigate the teachings like that. So we do that. However, that's the kind of the last point that I wanted to make with respect to investigating the teachings. The teachings on karma inevitably will have to involve some form of faith, which I don't know if we can call it blind faith or informed faith. But knowing that, for example, we experience now suffering, pain, because in one of our previous lifetimes, we have committed such and such action, it requires a certain level of belief, of faith. But we don't want to leave it just to being a blind faith, accept it like that, but we want to study more about karma so that we can karma and other sets of teachings so that our faith will be supported by other logical tools. So we are working towards informed faith, but there's still some degree of faith that cannot be absolutely verified now, that is required in order to think of karma. But I think that this faith cannot be rushed, cannot be contrived. I mean, we can try to contrive a sense of faith, but it is likely that in our inner mind, we're still going to have a bit of a doubt. And so these are the points that I think that we need to consider when we think of karma, right? So considering that we have a mind, which is not physical, it's not a product of the body. It depends upon the body, it is supported on the body, but it's not a function of the body. We need then also to think of past and future life. We need to think of causality, and we need to think of the teachings and the teachers in order to bring all those points together to deepen our understanding of the working of karma. How are we doing so far? Okay, cool. And that brings us then to the general characteristics of karma. And so what I thought of doing in the next few weeks is to base our discussion of karma on the presentation of karma found in Lama Tsongkhapa's texts, not only the Lamrim Chenmo, but other presentation of the Lamrim, but also looking at some points that are found in the reading material that you guys were given. I also have some summaries of karma, particularly in relation to the 10 paths of actions that I've created through or during the study programs here at Chinrezig Institute and elsewhere, bringing together a few sources and analyzing in great details killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and so forth, which for us will constitute the discussion of a more extensive presentation of karma. But the whole presentation of karma in the presentation of the Lambrim begins with identifying the general characteristics of karma, how it works in general, before delving into specific details. And so let's look at the general presentation of karma. So in the general characteristics of karma, it is said that karma, which means our actions, have 4 features. So first of all, karma is certain. That's the first feature. Karma is certain. The karma is definite in a sense that the basic rules are positive actions bring about positive result. Negative actions issue forth negative result. That is certain, which means a virtuous action produces a virtuous result. Non-virtuous action produces a result of suffering. There's no confusion or distortion in relation to the working of karma, which brings about an interesting point, because I think that when we think about it in relation to our own personal spiritual endeavor, when we, for example, try our best to shape our motivation, to shape our mind in our Buddhist practice, we think, sometimes we think that I've been trying my best for so many years. I've been practicing Buddhism for so many years. I've been practicing compassion and love and forgiveness and generosity and patience and so forth. And in return, what I get in this life is difficulties and problems. People don't like me. They do not appreciate me. I get sick. I've done this puja or the other puja. It did not help. My situation went from bad to worse. How does it work with karma? And so the first feature of karma is that karma is certain. It's not that practicing virtuously in this life will give you suffering. So we are trying to do our best in this life, to do positive things, but we experience problems and difficulties. And so the problems and difficulties that we experience are not because of the causes that we have created in this life, but they are related to, or positive causes that we've created in this life, but they are related to negative causes and conditions that were created likely in previous lifetimes, which then for us become unseen. Now, this is a matter of, I guess, trust. They're unseen, but definitely if we experience something that is miserable, uncomfortable, suffering, painful, and so forth, is a result of non-virtuous actions done before. If we experience something that is positive, it's definitely the result of positive actions done before. And so, again, kind of looking at the storyline that I created just a minute ago, kind of trying your best and experiencing suffering, it can also be other way around. You see someone that is behaving very negatively and they find success. Like, for example, I think that currently when you look at world stage, or at least I think that politics in the US or vice versa in other places, when you look at, for example, when you bring into discussion Elon Musk or Trump and so forth, you can think, well, such people are creating difficulties for others. Not everything that they do is positive. Actually, a lot of the things that they do is negative or bringing about problems to others, but they still experience personally positive results for themselves in that, they are wealthy, they find success in whatever they do, they get away with whatever with whatever they do. So could it be the case that someone behaves in a negative way, but still personally, positively successful? And so the first feature of karma says, no, this is not possible. Karma is certain, karma is definite. So although we might look at those people that seems to us to be kind of acting in a negative way, and I'm not saying that, I don't want to introduce a political discussion here, so I'm not saying that, I think that probably many of our political views might be in agreement, but It's not necessarily kind of, don't take my words here that I said that Trump is a bad person and everyone has to agree about it. So I'm not introducing it like that. But sometimes in general, we think that that person seems to be acting in a negative way, but they still find success in whatever they do. And so karma is certain in that negative actions produce negative results, positive actions produce positive results. If someone is successful in this life and they behave negatively, the success that they find in terms of wealth, enjoyments, happiness, and so forth is attributed to positive causes they have accumulated before, likely to be in previous lives. If they're acting in a negative way in this life, it will result in negative consequences in this or future lifetimes. But negative actions do not bring about happiness. Positive actions do not bring about suffering. Does it sound fair or okay? Michael, did you have a question or?
Yeah, we were talking in a previous course about karma a little bit, and here you seem to be on the side that karma is related to action, and in the previous course, karma seemed to be the presenter seemed to implied that karma was more related to intention. So if I don't like somebody and I plan out a negative thing, but then I don't carry it out, where is that as opposed to I don't have any intention of doing something negative, the two of us get together and then I just do something bad?
So it's a very good action. It's a very good question, because when we start to unpack what actions mean, so first of all, we look at the avenues for our actions. So we have physical actions, we have verbal actions, and we have mental actions or mental activities. Then when we look at what determines our action to be positive or negative, the main factor that determines actions is positive or negative is our intention. And so it is true that karma basically hinges on intention, but it's not the only factor. And so I think that probably in the next session, we will start to look at a more detailed presentation of karma. And so when you look at the way that Lama Tsongkhapa explained karma, extensive explanation of karma in his presentation of the Lambrim, he spoke about the 10 paths of action. Rather than speaking of the 10 actions, he spoke about the 10 paths of actions. And the path of action is a presentation of how when you perform when you have a course of action, you have so many factors that link in to the performance of an action, which determines its results. So to begin with, our motivation. But our motivation can be separated into different factors. Like, for example, when you perform a negative action in relation to a particular person or into a particular thing, do you have the right perception of that person, or is it a mistaken perception? Like, for example, now, Michael, if I want to punch you, let's say, but I have a wrong recognition of someone. I think that I need to punch Michael, but I punch Kodo instead. Do I have the right perception, or do I not have the right perception? Does it play a role in the weight of an action? So that's not the perception is discussed. Then the motivation. Is the motivation involved in one of the 3 root afflictions: anger, attachment, ignorance? Then, so the main force you could say that determines my action would be my motivation, virtuous or non-virtuous motivation. But then what about the performance? How do I perform the action? Then how do I bring the action into culmination? Do I rejoice in the creation of that action, or do I do something regretfully? Like, for example, my house here at Tremresic Institute is infested by termites. And so if we don't treat the termites, bye-bye house. So you have to treat the house. In the treatment of the house, termites will be killed. And so there are things that you do deliberately without thinking that I just need to kind of bloody obliterate those termites. You don't kind of think about them in a negative way, but you think that, well, if I don't treat my house, bye-bye house. At the end of the action, you also kind of, you regret having done that. You think that that was a negative action. The remedial things that you can do puja for this and puja for that, and you can do, you know, animal liberation practices and so forth. And so all those things can change the course of the maturation of karma. They reduce the efficacy of karma and so forth. And so karma is an action being determined mainly by the motivation, but other factors link in as well. And they are presented as the path of action. And we will start to go into greater details in our next session.
So action is not always, so there's more to it than just the physical me acting it out. When you say action, you're not just talking about the physical, I did this. It's the motivation, it's the planning, it's the intention and all that.
Yeah, well, you can say that action, karma is action, but determining an action to be positive or negative, very positive, very negative, slightly positive, slightly negative, many factors link in. One of them is the intention. The intention is definitely a massive power that determines whether this karma is positive or negative, virtuous or non-virtuous, but the intention is only one of them. I mean, it's a major factor, but it's just part of it. It's important to understand kind of all those different components as much as we can, because then we can make sure that we affect our behavior and the result of our behavior in a way that is more skillful, and reduce the efficacy of negative actions and increase the power of our positive actions. All right. And so I think that we'll leave it here for today. If you have no other questions, I have another session starting in 40 minutes, more or less. And so I'm wondering if do you have any other questions? All right. And so what I suggest is we will dedicate the virtue that we have created together today in speaking and thinking, speaking of karma, thinking of karma. I think that the first thing that we can dedicate to is so that we can inform the way that we behave, inform our practice, so that we'll be able to behave in a way that is more ethical for ourselves and ethical for others, that will underpin our Buddhist practice, so that we'll create the avenues for not only being of benefit to ourselves, but also to bringing greater benefits to others. So that's our general intention. But on top of that, since we have a few verses that we often say after the teachings, let's also say them together. And so first of all, we will dedicate for the development of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment in our own mind. So may the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not arisen, arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, might quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And also for the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and for success in his activities. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Jinrajik Tenzin Gyatso, please remain till samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigrative beings who make extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion. To the Lotus Holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then at the end for Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche, but we could also keep in our hearts and minds the spiritual teachers that we rely upon, but also the people that help us to study and practice the Dhamma. So I think that we can include in our minds and hearts the people and the teachers that are involved with Tupten Nobuning, Geshe Sherab, Ven Dundrupla, and other people that have been involved for Tupten Nobuning for a long time. So you uphold this abuse moral way, who serves a bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Vajrayana's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Sever of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you very much. And I shall see you next week. Thank you very much.